I think the key issue from my perspective is that I think we have to look beyond the free schools agenda into what's the nature of education and learning that we're needing to deliver in the 21st century. And everyone talks about how great the UK education system is. Yes, it's great. It has been exporting many things to India, China, and various other parts of the world, in the Middle East. But the real issue is, if you look at places like South Korea, if you look at places like Singapore, if you look at places like Chaos Pilots in Denmark, they're showing what a new education framework will look like. It is going to be based hugely on a shift in mindsets, and capabilities around collaboration and various other things. And I think unless we start to really deal with this issue, we're going to have a dysfunctional education system at its heart. And I think so. Free schools agenda is very, very important, very interesting. But I think we need to start to actually focus on the long-term picture, and then work back into the freedom free schools can possibly give us to address those issues.
I'm a member of BCSE, and I've been invited to chair a panel on free schools, so a debate which Indy took part in. I'm an architect and a client design advisor working in BSF for the last 7 years, but also I'm a parent setting up a free school in Hackney for creative entrepreneurship. So with several hats on, I've come here to chair a panel about free schools, which comprised people who are pro and quite anti free schools. It's a very political agenda. We didn't really get beyond the initial politics around admissions and sharp-elbowed middle-class parents to talking about school environments. But obviously that's a big political debate at the moment as well.
What I learned from a kind of long-term experience of kind of going to Chaos Pilots for several visits now has been actually they focus on curriculum. The curriculum is effectively interesting, but the real issue that they focus on is shifting the mindsets of students. And over the course of 3 years, that's what they really focus on. And it's various techniques. I mean, there's lots going on around neuro-linguistic programming, neuroprogramming, which is going to be absolutely centric to education structures. I think we're going to have to talk about really interesting stuff that's going on in hack spaces and in kind of maker fairs, which are going to open up a new three-dimensional learning infrastructure and how you learn through tactile doing and tactile innovation on the ground. I think we're going to have to focus on more project-based learning, which is collaborative rather than singular and individual. I think we're going to focus less on isolated business academies. I mean, in the hub, what we learn is that you don't put the business people away from the creatives. You don't put the business people away from the creatives and the lawyers and effectively the kind of educationalists. You mix them up, because that's where really interesting energy occurs. That's where new types of creativity occur. I think this kind of streaming of education is part of the problem, and I think we're going to have to look at it in more fundamental ways. And that's definitely starting to occur internationally. And I think our challenge is, and certainly as a parent, I would be saying, that's the sort of education my kid needs, and I think that's the sort of education we're going to have to deliver if these kids are going to be relevant for the 21st century. That's unfortunately the reality. So in a way, whether teachers are capable, ready, or whether our infrastructure is capable or ready, maybe not, but that's not really the issue. The critical thing is the need is now.
The Hackney Free School is for creative entrepreneurship, and the reason for that being that Hackney is a very creative and very entrepreneurial environment. And going back to what Indy said about different ways of learning and different types of learning and teaching that might happen in the future, I think it's clear that for quite a lot of students now, their education is failing them because they're not being able to engage with the education models that they're being proposed. And I feel that it's really about looking at the opportunities that are there. There is a dire need of more schools in Hackney. There are about 2,000 too few primary places, enormous numbers of parents moving out of borough or sending their children out of borough, a large number of independent schools set up by local minority communities to deliver the education they don't feel that they're getting. There's no choice. The admissions policy is completely against any kind of choice. It's a very, very difficult place to be a parent, and yet it has so much going for it. The businesses that are there, the creative businesses. Anna Sugar grew up on my council estate. And the children are incredibly creative, and I think the debate at the moment, the political debate, is very, very high octane in the media, and it's all about who owns education in this country, who actually owns the delivery of it, the thinking about it, and the tussle at the moment is between schools, unions, local authorities, central government, parents are starting to get involved in that debate, private sector. That's why it's so high octane, that's why it's so political. Unfortunately, the politics gets in the way of the education. But I know it sounds, because it's not very trite to say it, but it's the children themselves that own the education. You cannot force someone to educate themselves or to become educated. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And you see that we do a lot of work with pupil referral units and SEBD schools and children that are excluded from the system for social, emotional and behavioural problems. And quite often they're very, very intelligent, very creative, very entrepreneurial people. Why are they being excluded from the education system? They are not being allowed to take any ownership of their own education. And that's what's incredible. And yet, outside of the school boundary, outside of the school, the fence of the school, children are educating themselves every minute of the day on their phones. They're collaborating, they're communicating, they're building relationships, they're finding out about the world. That's very challenging to politicians, to the status quo, to everybody else. People are worried about that. So I think that's the interesting debate that's happening at the moment, and I'm not sure yet whether or not free schools will allow children to be more involved in their own decision-making and education. But that's what I would like to see happening. It's certainly one of the foundations of what we're trying to do in Hackney.